Welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to have Dr. John Gartner on, a psychologist, widely published journals and books written for publications, Baltimore Sun and others, and founder of Duty to Warn, an association of mental health professionals warning us about Donald Trump. Dr. Gartner, nice to have you on, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So you've been raising alarm bells for a long time. We were talking about
Right.
before we came on air. But tell people a little bit, what's your background and your area of expertise so they understand where you're coming from when you're talking about Trump?
Well, sure. Well, as I was saying, there's really been two phases in this work. One that began in 2017 is that was saying to you, I was a little like that character Randall Mindy in the movie Don't Look Up. It's only because of my obscure academic specialty that I was aware of how dangerous Donald Trump was. I studied under a world expert in an obscure diagnosis called malignant narcissism, which was actually designed to explain Hitler by Erich Fromm. So when I realized that there was a candidate who met all the criteria, it was like an asteroid heading towards Earth. So that's what prompted me to get involved in the first place and start organizing my colleagues, which we did, and we became a movement. But, after Biden won the election, we all took off our uniforms and went home. We went back to our normal lives. I'm writing a book on psilocybin therapy. I have no interest. Please don't take it the wrong way. I have no interest in being on your show. I have no interest in getting back into politics. I actually had put a tweet at the top of Duty to Warn saying, retired, see ya, look for my book on psilocybin therapy. But what drove me back was this false narrative, seeing that the media was gaslighting the public, saying that Biden was doddering or demented and Trump was somehow robust and okay. And they were gaslighting us. It was a double lie. First, they were pathologizing the normal signs of aging Biden, like forgetting names, which I do as well as a senior citizen, and pathologizing the flagrant signs of dementia that Trump was showing, not knowing whether he's running against Nancy Pelosi or Nikki Haley. I mean, these are serious demented errors. And so I realized no one with the right letters after their name was stepping forward. And so I had to do it. I had to return. But since I have stepped forward, it's not me alone. We have a petition. Over 500 licensed mental health professionals have signed it. And I invite people to read their comments where they describe why they signed the petition. What they see in Donald Trump and what gave them the clinical reasons at the top of Duty to Warn, our pinned tweet.
Sure. So let's take a step back, though. What did you see in 2017 that made you first? Because my understanding is you weren't active in politics. It wasn't some political partisan motivation. You're a mental health professional. And so what alarmed you in 2017? And what were the signs then so people understand?
Right. Well, so Erich Fromm is a very famous psychoanalyst, is one of the founders of humanistic psychology, escaped Hitler. And ironically, he's known for saying that man is basically good in his psychology, but he was obsessed with describing what he called the quintessence of evil, which is a particular personality type that he seriously retrofitted around Hitler to explain that kind of monstrous leader. And it has four components. One, of course, is narcissism. The other is paranoia. All of his, conspiracy theories and his feeling that he's constantly being persecuted, and that justifies his harming other people. And then psychopathy, being antisocial, lying, stealing, exploiting people, violating their rights. Okay. And then finally, the fourth, and this is a very important, sadism, taking pleasure in harming people, demeaning people, destroying people, and taking pleasure in destroying institutions, and that there's a kind of omnipotent, destructive orgy of pleasure that comes from this perverse personality. So I could see that he had, and he's very hypomanically driven too. So he has all this energy to direct in these negative ways. So I could see that he was a mortal threat to the country. And I wasn't the only one to see it. I was just one of the first ones to jump ahead and say it. And then once I said it, lots of people saw the emperor had no clothes. You didn't have to even be a mental health professional to see this is one of the worst human beings on the planet.
So then in 2017, you begin the idea we have a duty to warn the world about Donald Trump. And what did you do? I think you were in the book with Dr. Bandy Lee. Am I correct about that? Because I had Dr. Lee on maybe a year ago. We were talking about a different part of this, but how was it received in 2017 when you were coming out there? Did you get a sense people were like, yeah, we see it too? And thankfully a mental health professional is telling us it's not just us. This is clinical. There's something wrong with the guy.
Right. Well, let me tell you something about Bandy Lee's book. I'm 66 years old. I've looked at the New York Times bestseller list almost every week of my life. It's the first time in my life that I can remember an edited book, not a single author, an edited book by a group of academics made it to the New York Times bestsellers list.
Wow.
I mean, it's a phenomenon.
Sure.
And it's simply a matter of there was zero supply of information from professionals about, and there was massive demand. Everybody wanted to know what the F is wrong with this guy, right? And there were no professionals to talk to. So when that book came out, it was like lighting a match in a vacuum. It just exploded.
And it was really compelling stuff to look back at. So Trump, so 2020, you take off your uniforms, game's over, Trump's gone. Now he's back in the limelight and you're out warning again. What have you seen in terms of, and maybe you could take it through slowly a little bit, the changes in Trump that you've perceived that today that is different than the Donald Trump in 2020, who already was awful, who was truly, the narcissist who was dangerous, almost like a Hitler-esque type of mentality. What do you see now?
Now we see clear signs of dementia. And I wrote op-eds about this with some physicians in 2017 and 2018. We were among the group that urged Ronnie Jackson to give him the MOCA because he was already showing signs of dementia. Of course, we know how Ronnie Jackson handled that press conference. He just lied his ass off basically about everything and probably also his cognitive health. But the thing is that what we see is an overall pattern of decline. That's what we saw in 2018. If you compared his speeches in the 80s, he actually had a rich vocabulary. He spoke in polished paragraphs. Now he's struggling to finish a sentence or even a word. That was in 2018. But what's happened is people who know him well have noticed massive deterioration since he left office. In other words, first we were looking at deterioration over 30 years. Now we're looking at deterioration over 4 years. And that's the nature of dementia. It accelerates in its deterioration. So now he can't get through a rally without committing one of these phonemic aphasias where he uses a non-word in the place of a word because he can't say it. And so he just makes up a word that has a root of the word in it. There's lots of supercuts, on the internet of these. And he also commits what we call semantic aphasia, where he uses words in the wrong way, the oranges of the investigation. But the other area is his memory. We've been focusing on Biden calling the old president of France by the new president of France by the old president of France's name, the way I can call my younger daughter by my older daughter's name. That's part of aging. Sure. It doesn't mean that you're not competent. But Trump is making the kind of memory errors we only see in dementia. One of the things he's doing is what it's called combining or mixing up people and generations. So when he was saying the person he was running against in the primary was responsible for security at the Capitol, that's not just saying the wrong name. That's not like a gotcha, like, oh, you said the wrong name. He literally was confusing the people. He was literally merging them into one person. And when he keeps saying Obama is president, he said it 8 times now on camera. Lord knows how often he says it off camera. I think either he's so disoriented he doesn't know who's president, or he's actually combining Obama and Biden into this one evil Democratic president who's humiliated him. But in either case, we're talking about a whole other level of memory impairment and a whole other level of disorientation. I believe a lot of the times he just doesn't know the context of what's even going on around him.
Can I just touch on something? Because I wrote about for CNN last year, I think late in the year. Or no, earlier this year, I'm sorry. I'm getting confused. But it was earlier this year about a list of what Trump had said that was alarming. And one of them that got a little press that I thought jumped out at, because what you're saying, combining people, he goes in South Carolina during the campaign and talks about how he beat Jeb Bush in 2016, but he's talking about George Bush. And he said he served in the military and people thought I couldn't beat someone in the military and he got us in the Iraq war. How'd that work out? But no, you run against Jeb Bush, who didn't serve in the military, who was governor of Florida, who didn't. So in his mind, is that a sign of something there?
It's a strong sign of something there. Okay, it's a clinical indicator. When my uncle had dementia, at one point he got agitated and said, "Somebody call John. He's a lawyer. He'll know what to do." Because my dad was a lawyer. This is a type of mistake that demented people make that non-demented people don't make. Okay, and he's been disoriented. He's some of it seems humorous, but it actually shows his disorientation. There were airports during the revolution, or we're going to have World War II. But also, he said his father was born in Germany. His own father
Right.
he said, was born in Germany, when it was his grandfather. That's the level of deterioration we're talking about. And now he can't get through a rally without getting into a place where he's literally speaking in a way that is incomprehensible. The press calls it rambling, and that's really a euphemism. He's actually speaking in a way that nobody could tell you what he said. Okay, that's incoherence. That's different, and that's part of what happens with dementia.
I tell people, I urge them, as painful it is, you can watch what he says, but read the transcripts, and it is gibberish. Like, he literally today, I was pulling it up because he said something outside of the courthouse about it being cold, and I'll just read a little. He said, "We have another day of a court in a freezing courthouse. It's very cold in there, on purpose, I believe. They don't seem to be able to get the temperature up. It shouldn't be complicated, but if you're freezing courthouse, but that's fine. That's just fine. It's a rigged trial. Thank you very much." Like, I'm like, what happened? You're sounding like, well, my mom had dementia, and that was like that kind of pattern where it's like some things make sense, but then you're just in another place. I'm like, what are you talking about?
See, and it's really interesting because my aunt, was the main caretaker for my uncle, she keeps leaving me these messages on my answering machine. I'm an 83-year-old lady in Connecticut. I can see he's demented. Why aren't they saying it on TV? Because she's lived through it. You know what I mean? And you recognize the telltale signs. I'd like to read another piece of speech from him that's recent, his Gettysburg Address. And before I do, let me explain why it's an example of demented speech. It's clear that he doesn't know what Gettysburg is. By that, I don't mean he doesn't understand the true spirit of Gettysburg or he's historically ignorant. I mean, he's completely disoriented. He doesn't know. He's drawing a blank.
Right.
He's drawing a blank. And so what people do with dementia when they draw a blank, they do two things. One, they use a lot of superlative words as filler words. Oh, great, marvelous, wonderful, because they don't know what's going on. So they just express an emotion. The other thing they do is they make up stories because nature abhors a vacuum. So they actually fill in a narrative that you know couldn't have happened. You probably saw this with your mother. It's like, no, Mom, that didn't happen. Or that person couldn't have, called you. They've been dead for 3 years, whatever.
Sure, we heard that a lot.
And so listen with those two thoughts in mind to the battle, to his Gettysburg Address. The Battle of Gettysburg. What an unbelievable. It was so much. So interesting. And so vicious and horrible, beautiful in so many different ways. So he's just throwing out superlatives. It represents such a big portion of the success of this country. It's a non sequitur, right?
Right, exactly.
And then he goes, the statement of Robert E. Lee, who's no longer in favor. Did you ever notice that? No longer in favor? Oh, that's just a stop to the racists. But then he goes, never fight uphill, me boys, never fight uphill. Fighting uphill. And he said, wow. He lost his great general. And the other thing he said is, I come to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Oh, he says, Gettysburg. Sorry, I missed an important line. Sorry. Gettysburg. Wow. I mean, that's just wow. He goes, I go to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania to look and to watch. Well, first of all, we know he's never been to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania in some solemn private moment to look and to watch. What he's actually describing is what he's doing right now, because that's all he can do. He's just looking and he's watching. And going, but he's not comprehending. Wow. And going, wow, Gettysburg, wow.
I'm chatting with Dr. John Gartner, a psychologist, the founder of Duty to Warn. So people understand, because people throw the word dementia around. Clinically, what does dementia mean?
Well, we see that first of all, there's a bunch of different kinds of dementia.
Okay.
So it's a clinical state that can be produced by a number of different diseases. One is Alzheimer's that runs in his family. The other is frontotemporal dementia, and there are a few others, vascular dementia. There's actually some debate
dementia, right? Vascular dementia is what we learned about my mom.
Okay. And they do produce slightly different symptoms, but they all do produce dementia. And so actually, if he were our patient, at this point, you'd be referring him for a brain scan. And for a neuropsychiatric evaluation, because he's clearly deeply impaired, and then you'd want to confirm the diagnosis by seeing exactly what was going wrong with his brain. But these signs are not subtle. When you can't form an English word, or you're incomprehensible, or you're making stuff up, or again, clearly disoriented. It's interesting. I spoke to someone who's worked with dementia patients all her life, and she said, look, I think all the stuff you're saying is really right on, because I know you're focusing on these phonemic aphasias, but as an expert, what I see is he doesn't understand the context he's living in. I recognize it when people are that confused and disoriented. He keeps thinking Obama's president. I mean, if you went to a psychiatric emergency room and they asked you who is president of the United States and you said Obama, they would admit you for observation. I mean, they would, because they would have to write into their chart disoriented.
But then but I know it's really Biden, but Obama's pulling the strings. That would be different. But that was the cover story that Donald Trump, he treaded out because, right, we all know it's a cover story because he said things, because I wrote about this in detail. He said things like, we beat Obama. No one thought we could beat Obama. And then, I'm like, you didn't run against Obama, you idiot. So, all right. So dementia can be caused by different things. And is it the symptoms that what are these other symptoms of dementia? Are there anything else? We know the confusion, the inability to remember. Is there anything else? And where is this going?
Well, first of all, there's also a decrease in motor performance. He's been having trouble with fine motor coordination, drinking water with two hands, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And also he's evidencing something called a wide-based gait. This is something that I didn't know about that the specialist told me about. He kind of swings his right leg like it's a dead weight in sort of a circular motion. And that's apparently something that where there's some deterioration in the motor performance of the brain that causes that very specific kind of thing. And some of the people who think he's got frontotemporal dementia point to his sort of the way he leans forward. But also we see a deterioration in behavior. So it's hard to believe. I always say this to people, look at Donald Trump today, because that's the best Donald Trump you're ever going to see. Because the nature of this illness is it's deteriorating. Okay, so every day is worse than the last. And one of the things that dementia does to people with bad personality disorders is it makes the personality disorders 10 times worse. So he's going to be everything he is, but more erratic and irrational and impulsive and confused and just sort of randomly vicious. So there's that aspect. The other thing people need to understand, and maybe you went through this with your mother, it's not just a deteriorating illness. At some point, the rate of deterioration begins to accelerate. So, for example, we noticed that deterioration from the 80s to 2015, but we noticed massive deterioration in the last 4 years. And now we're noticing deterioration almost every day. Okay, so the rate of deterioration is increasing. And at a certain point, people fall off what they call the cognitive cliff, where they really just become totally disabled. And I honestly believe that if Trump were to get reelected, that he would become completely incapacitated in office. I don't trust his cabinet that they would remove him under the 25th Amendment. I think they'd wheel him around like the weekend at Bernie's and exploit him for everything they could grift out of it and everything Russia could get out of it. So we would have the worst case scenario. We would have actually not just an evil leader, but one that was actually cognitively incapacitated and kind of being wheeled around by unscrupulous insiders.
So when the news reports were that Donald Trump in the first about 5 days of the trial fell asleep for short periods of time, any clinical signs?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, there is. Now, look, I'm not saying that falling asleep is in and of itself a sign of dementia. I'm famous for falling asleep at dinner parties because, I don't get enough sleep and I work too hard. Bill Clinton was famous for falling asleep at, social occasions. But first of all, even that, it's very unusual for people to fall asleep at their trial. I can't remember it. Maybe I'm going to ask you, can you remember any other defendant in any other case that you reported on or read about where the defendant even once fell asleep, much less most days? He's falling asleep most days. So in other words, no. The brief answer is no. And so this is showing a level of impairment, again, that's so many standard deviations beyond normal limits. Yes, people with dementia tend to fall asleep. But people who don't have dementia can inhibit that response when their adrenaline is pumping and they're in a focused situation. He can't. And also, by the way, there have been multiple credible reports of his having, sort of outrageous episodes of flatulence in the courtroom. And that's obviously led to a lot of humor, on Twitter. Sure. But the point is that it's an indication of losing control of a basic bodily function. And there are rumors that he uses adult, diapers. I don't know if he does or not. I have no way to confirm that. There's in pictures that sort of suggest that. But in other words, it's all part of a package. The man is falling apart.
Does the fact that he's under intense pressure, objective pressure, if you were facing 88 felonies, any of us would feel great pressure. Plus, you're running for office, and you have to win this election because it's probably the only way you don't go to jail and spend the last days of your life in a prison cell. Does increased pressure like this hasten the decline?
Absolutely. Yes, I don't mean to be perversely enjoying that, but but the answer is yes.
So it does. So so what would you say if we're looking going forward would be more signs that are truly even more alarming? Like we've seen a lot. I think it's deeply alarming, the guy. I think there's something, I agree with you. There's something wrong. that he's not the same person. Megyn Kelly said it. Governor Sununu, who's a Republican, said I knew him before. He's lost his fastball. They're trying to be nice and stuff.
Yeah.
So what else should we be looking for? What else would be a sign that there's more cognitive decline?
Right. Well, first of all, more of these disoriented memory things where he's saying, Biden beat Obama. He's going to say more and more things that are simply just factually not true. And the thing is, one of the people asked me on one of these podcasts, well, he's always been a liar. How can we tell the difference between that and a lie? It's a great question. It's almost like his pathology has been the best a way for him to hide his new pathology, because his old pathology already made him a liar. We desensitized to his telling us all kinds of crazy, he sparred with Muhammad Ali or whatever.
Right.
But the difference between this and a lie is twofold. One, this doesn't benefit him in any way. It's not putting him in a good light. It's not helping him take your money. Okay. So it's not punishing his enemies. Okay. So he's not getting something. For a lie to be effective, right, it has to be coherent, and you have to convince someone of it. These are stories that are kind of incoherent, that show he's disoriented. He's kind of making stuff up. He's not trying to, and so that's the other way, we call this confabulation. Confabulation is when people make up a narrative because our brains can't stand a blank sheet of paper. So if I'm confused about what's going on, like, why am I here? Who are you? Then I'll make up a story. Oh, Dean, I remember you. You're my son, or you're my, because so this is what he's doing. He's literally, I think this is what we'll see. We'll see more phonemic aphasias. We'll see, but I think in the big picture is we need to understand he's disoriented half the time. He literally doesn't know who he is, where he is, what's going on, who's president, who he's running. And the point is, I'm hoping there will finally be a moment where people understand he's not there. Right. Now, it's not all the time, of course. And that's, as you probably knew with your mom, there are lucid moments, and they're worse in the evenings. And, he's worse, I think, at night, possibly. Maybe he's doing some sundowning, some psychologists have suggested. But we're going to see deterioration at all these levels. But I think at some level, and we're going to see more of the incomprehensible speech. But the media keeps helping him out by editing those parts out of what they show on TV.
I'm just stunned by where we are as a nation. And you're right, the media coverage glosses over things. If Joe Biden fell asleep if he fell asleep one time in a week, we'd be nonstop 3 times in a week. There'd be psychiatrists on air going, what could it be? Is it medical? Is it physical? That kind of stuff. But with this, and I wrote an article last week about this for my newsletter, like the corporate media at least asked the questions. The guy could be the next president. Why did you fall asleep at 3 times at your own trial? Everyone's talking about you. You might think like he's alert. So, what do you think? I don't know what it'll take other than a glaring moment where it can't be defended. Before we wrap up, Doctor, is there anything more other mental health professionals should be talking about to raise this to people? Would it take some good people who are actually on the right, perhaps to get credibility with more corporate media and go, okay, it's not people who are partisan. I'm not suggesting you're partisan, but I'm saying you've been saying this for years. What will it take to cut through?
Well, I think doing shows like this helps. I'm trying to get as many mental health professionals out in front talking about this as possible. And what I'm hoping is that we will move up the media food chain. Yeah, we are talking to people at MSNBC, but meanwhile, the phone hasn't rung. Well,
you reached out to me and I was so happy. And then I'm like, you're reaching out to everyone, which is so important, because you're right. There's a point where it gets in the collective consciousness of the media people, where they go, that's what I'm trying. We should have that person on. And then people start talking about it. It becomes water cooler conversation and all this stuff. And no, we need to get there. Look, I agree with you. I've been for the last, not from a mental health point of view, but I knew something was wrong and it's not the same thing. And I made the point to my editor at CNN, and I sent me the things. He goes, okay, write about it. And I wrote about it, and then I wrote about it for someplace else. And then, you have people talking about it, but you're out there as a psychologist drilling down. I think it's so important. So we'll talk more before this is elected, and have you on to interpret the signs. I was
going to say, you might as well have me back on, because it's like the dementia roundup every week. I promise you, whatever random week you have me back, okay, there'll be a new Gettysburg, there'll be new phonemic aphasias, there'll be new people he's combined into one person, there'll be new incomprehensible screeds. So,
that's great. It's like, what does drooling mean? Oh, okay. That's a whole different segment we'll have on that one. So, all right, Doctor. And if people want to follow your work, where can they go?
Oh yeah, so we're on Twitter at Duty to Warn, and like I said, the pinned tweet is really the comments of the doctors explaining why they signed the petition. So I just like people to read those because I think it's more persuasive than just listening to one doctor, me, or just hearing how many signatures we have. They really took some time to explain their logic in coming to that diagnosis.
Thanks, doctor. Nice chatting with you. I look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Yeah.